Richard Sterling has built an empire of steel and glass, but behind the walls of his wealth lies a daughter he struggles to connect with. One ordinary day in the park, he discovers Emily laughing and learning, not from a private tutor, but from Sophie, a homeless teenager with worn clothes, sharp eyes, and a mind brighter than most. What begins as a curious encounter soon unravels into a journey of trust, doubt, and transformation. Emily sees Sophie as the best teacher she's ever had, while Richard battles the whispers of society and his own fear of scandal. But in Sophie's quiet resilience and unshakable spirit, Richard finds something money could never buy: hope, compassion, and a reminder of what truly matters. A heartwarming tale of friendship, courage, and second chances. This story will stay with you long after the last page. Hey family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and give this video a like. It truly means the world to us. Don't forget to share it with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you so much for the support. Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story. The air was cool that Saturday morning. The city park was alive with the sounds of children laughing, birds fluttering from tree to tree, and the distant hum of traffic. On a wooden bench under a big oak tree, 7-year-old Emily Sterling sat with her pink backpack open, her books scattered around her small hands. Emily was the only daughter of Richard Sterling, one of the richest men in the country. Everyone knew his name. His face was often on magazine covers, and his company logo shone from skyscrapers downtown. But in that park, Richard was not Mr. Sterling the billionaire. He was just Emily's father, walking behind her with his coffee cup, keeping a watchful eye. Richard expected to see Emily flipping through picture books, maybe drawing with her crayons. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes narrowed. Sitting right beside Emily was a girl. A thin girl with tangled brown hair, wearing a faded hoodie and jeans that looked 2 sizes too big. Her shoes had holes at the toes, and her face, though young, carried the shadow of someone who had seen too much. Emily wasn't afraid of her. She was smiling, listening closely as the stranger pointed at a math book. Richard's heart skipped. Who is she? Why is a homeless girl sitting so close to my daughter? He took a cautious step forward, ready to intervene. But then something made him pause. The girl was speaking softly, her finger guiding Emily across the page. No, not like that, the girl said gently. If you have 12 apples and you give away 4, how many do you still have? Emily pressed her lips together, thinking hard. 8. The girl grinned. Yes. See, you're good at this. Emily's eyes lit up. You explain better than my teacher at school. Richard froze where he stood. The homeless girl was teaching his daughter. And Emily, his bright, precious Emily, was listening with more interest than he had seen in weeks. Something stirred inside him. Confusion, worry, but also curiosity. Richard cleared his throat loudly, making his presence known. Emily looked up with a cheerful wave. Daddy, look, she said, pointing at the girl. She's helping me with math. The girl immediately stiffened, as if ready to run. She pulled her hands back, her body shrinking into the bench. Her eyes, wide and guarded, met Richard's. I'm sorry, sir, she said quickly. I wasn't doing anything wrong. She asked me a question, and I thought I could help. Her voice was soft but steady. Richard studied her. She couldn't have been more than 15, maybe 16. There was dirt on her hands, but her eyes, those eyes were sharp, bright, and full of something he couldn't quite name. Intelligence, perhaps, or hunger, not the kind for food but for knowledge. Emily, Richard said slowly, do you know this girl? Emily shook her head. No, Daddy, but she's nice. She's really smart. She knows how to do fractions. Fractions. Richard remembered how Emily had struggled last week, crying at the kitchen table because numbers refused to make sense. He had hired expensive tutors, but Emily hadn't liked any of them. Now here she was, smiling, learning, because of a stranger with torn clothes. Richard's instinct told him to take Emily's hand and walk away. to protect her from whatever danger might come from getting close to someone from the streets. That was the safe, logical choice. But his feet didn't move. Instead, he found himself asking, "What's your name?" The girl hesitated, her shoulders tightening. "Sophie," she said at last. "Well, Sophie," Richard said, keeping his voice even, "it seems you've made quite an impression on my daughter." Sophie lowered her eyes. "I didn't mean to. I was just sitting here when she dropped her pencil. I picked it up, and then she asked me about the math problem." Emily chimed in, tugging at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can Sophie come again, please? She explains things in a way I understand." Richard's chest tightened. He had built empires, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and outsmarted rivals. Yet here he was, standing in a park, completely unsettled because his daughter wanted to learn from a homeless girl. He forced a smile. "We'll talk about it later, sweetheart." But deep down, Richard knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something strange, something he couldn't yet define. And as Sophie stood, mumbling an excuse and walking away with quick, cautious steps, Richard felt an unusual pull. A question burned in his mind. Who is this girl? And why do I feel that she just changed everything? That night, Richard Sterling sat in his study, the city skyline glowing through the tall glass windows. His desk was covered with files and contracts worth millions. But for once, numbers and signatures did not hold his attention. Instead, he kept seeing the girl from the park. Sophie, her thin face, her torn hoodie, and those sharp, alert eyes that had studied Emily's math book as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Richard leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the desk. Why would a homeless girl know fractions so well? He had seen many people living on the streets in his life, but rarely had one made him pause. Most people avoided them. Some offered coins. Richard himself had given large donations to charities, but always from a distance. Never personally. But this girl was different. The next morning, Emily was already talking about her. "Daddy, can we go to the park again?" she asked over breakfast, her spoon clinking in her cereal bowl. "I want Sophie to help me with my homework." Richard folded his newspaper. "Emily, there are many teachers who can help you. Why are you so interested in this girl?" Emily pouted. "Because she listens to me," she explains slowly, "not like my teacher who rushes. And she smiles when I get it right. Daddy, she's kind." Richard exchanged a glance with the housekeeper, who tried not to show her disapproval. It wasn't every day that a billionaire's daughter wanted lessons from someone off the streets. "Emily," Richard said carefully, "sometimes people are not what they seem. We must be cautious." "But she was nice," Emily insisted. "You saw her. She didn't hurt me. She helped me." Richard sighed. Logic told him to forbid this nonsense. But something about Emily's excitement kept him silent. Later that day, Richard asked his driver to take a detour past the park. He lowered the tinted window slightly as they drove by. And there she was. Sophie sat under the same oak tree, hugging a backpack that looked older than she was. She had a notebook on her lap, scribbling something with a short pencil. A plastic bag with what looked like half a sandwich rested beside her. Richard frowned. She wasn't just sitting idly. She was studying. "Stop here," he told the driver. The man looked surprised but obeyed. Richard stepped out, the sharp click of his polished shoes on the pavement breaking the quiet. Sophie looked up immediately, her body tense like a rabbit ready to flee. "It's you," she said softly. Richard nodded. "Yes, and it's you." For a moment, they just stared at each other. Sophie's eyes darted around as if checking for an escape path. "I'm not bothering anyone," she said quickly. "If you want me to leave this place, I will." Richard raised a hand. No, I'm not here to drive you away. I just—" He hesitated. Billionaires did not usually search for words, but right now he felt strangely clumsy. "I wanted to know more about you." Sophie blinked. "About me?" "Yes," Richard said. "You were teaching my daughter yesterday. Where did you learn to do that?" Sophie looked down at her notebook, then back at him. "I used to go to school," she said in a low voice. I liked it. I was good at it. She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. But then life happened. Richard caught the bitterness hidden in those 3 words. He wanted to ask more, but he also sensed the wall she had put up. You're clearly intelligent, he said instead, and patient with children. Not everyone can explain things the way you did. A faint smile touched Sophie's face. I like helping, and your daughter, she's bright. She just needs someone to believe in her. Those words sank into Richard's mind like a stone into water. Someone to believe in her. He had given Emily the best of everything: schools, tutors, toys. But had he given her patience? Had he believed in her struggles instead of pushing for perfection? He cleared his throat. Emily wants to see you again. Sophie's eyes widened. She does. Yes. She says you made her understand what her teachers couldn't. For the first time, Sophie's guarded expression softened. There was warmth there, and something almost like hope. But then it faded. She shook her head. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Richard asked. Because people like you don't mix with people like me, she said simply. Sooner or later, someone will remind you of that. And then it will hurt her. Her honesty startled him. He opened his mouth to argue, but Sophie had already packed her notebook and stood up. Slinging her bag over her shoulder, she gave him a small nod and began to walk away. Richard watched her thin figure disappear among the park trees. And for the second time in 2 days, he felt the same strange pull in his chest. Who are you, Sophie? And why do I feel like I've only seen the surface of something much deeper? 2 days later, Richard returned to the park. He told himself it was only because Emily had begged again. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. Something about Sophie refused to leave his mind. This time, he walked with Emily holding his hand, her pink backpack bouncing on her shoulder. As soon as they reached the oak tree, Emily's eyes sparkled. There she is. Sophie was sitting cross-legged on the grass, a battered notebook open on her knees. She was so absorbed in her writing that she didn't notice them at first. Emily let go of her father's hand and ran over. Sophie! Startled, Sophie looked up, ready to bolt. But when she saw Emily's excited face, she relaxed slightly. You came back, Sophie said softly. Of course I did. Emily beamed. I brought more books. Can you help me again? Sophie hesitated, her eyes flicking to Richard, who was standing a few steps away. Richard gave a small nod. It's all right. I'm here. Still cautious, Sophie sat straighter as Emily plopped her books onto the grass. Soon, the two were leaning over multiplication tables. Sophie explained with patience, drawing little circles and groups on a scrap of paper. Emily giggled when she finally got the answer right. See, Daddy? She makes it easy. Richard smiled faintly. He had paid tutors thousands of dollars, yet none of them had drawn simple pictures to make numbers clear. But what caught his attention even more was the notebook Sophie had set aside. It wasn't filled with doodles or random scribbles. It was packed with neat handwriting, diagrams, and even what looked like complex equations. Curious, he bent down and picked it up. Sophie's head snapped up. Don't! She stopped, biting her lip, as if regretting her reaction. Richard glanced at the pages. There were sketches of molecules, notes about history, and even essays written in surprisingly good English. He flipped to one page and saw a long passage about astronomy, the stars, galaxies, and theories he hadn't thought about since college. This is impressive, Richard said. Sophie flushed and quickly reached for the notebook, hugging it to her chest. It's nothing. It's not nothing, he replied. Where did you learn all this? I told you, she muttered. I used to go to school. I loved learning. I read books when I can. Sometimes the library lets me in if I look clean enough. Her voice carried no self-pity, only simple fact. Richard was silent for a moment. He looked at Emily, who was happily solving problems with Sophie's help, then back at Sophie. You shouldn't be on the streets, he said finally. You have talent, potential. Sophie gave a small, sad smile. Potential doesn't mean much when you don't have a home, when you can't even afford food. Her words hit Richard harder than he expected. He, who lived in a mansion with more rooms than he could count, was suddenly face to face with the harshness of reality. Emily, unaware of the tension, tugged at Sophie's sleeve. "Can you come every day, please? You're the best teacher I ever had." Sophie's eyes softened. "I don't know, Emily. People might not like it." "Who cares what people think?" Emily pouted. "I like it, and Daddy's here too, so it's safe." Richard hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. Finally, he said, "If Sophie is willing, I don't see the harm in her helping you." Sophie looked at him sharply, as if searching his face for a trick. When she found none, she nodded slowly. "Just for a little while," she said. "As long as no one makes trouble." Richard extended his hand. "Then we have an agreement." Sophie stared at his hand, hesitant. But at last, she reached out and shook it. Her grip was firm despite her thin fingers. For the first time, Richard felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected: respect. As they packed up later, Richard found himself thinking, "This girl isn't just a street kid. She's something more, something hidden, and I intend to find out what." The days that followed were strange for Richard Sterling. Every evening, as he sat in his spotless dining room or worked late in his glass-walled office, he found his thoughts drifting back to the park. Not to his empire, not to his board meetings, but to Sophie. He watched her with Emily 3 times that week. Each time, he told himself it was the last. And each time, Emily begged for more. "Daddy, she makes it fun," Emily said one night, skipping through the living room with her workbook in hand. "I can do long division now. Sophie says numbers are like puzzles." Richard forced a smile. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." But inside, unease twisted in his chest. That evening, after Emily went to bed, Richard called his oldest friend, Charles, his business partner and confidant. They sat in the study, brandy glasses in hand. "So," Charles said, raising a brow, "your daughter is being tutored by a girl from the streets?" Richard frowned. "She's not just any girl. She's different, bright, educated. At least once educated. And Emily adores her." Charles leaned back, swirling his drink. "Be careful, Richard. This is how scandals start. Imagine the headlines. Sterling heir tutored by homeless teen. Investors don't like stories like that." Richard stared into his glass. "It's not about investors. It's about Emily. She's finally enjoying learning. Do you know how many tutors I've gone through? None of them reached her the way Sophie has." "Still," Charles pressed, "you don't know this girl. What if she's hiding something? What if she uses your daughter to get close to you? For money, or worse?" The words stung because they echoed Richard's own private doubts. He had thought them himself in sleepless moments. "Maybe," Richard admitted. "But when I look at her, I don't see manipulation. I see hunger, not just for food, but for knowledge, for a chance." Charles chuckled. "You're getting sentimental in your old age." Richard didn't laugh. Instead, he rose and walked to the window, staring at the glowing city. "Maybe I am," he murmured. The next day, Richard tested Sophie. While Emily worked on her sums, Richard asked casually, "Sophie, do you like history?" Her eyes lit up, surprising him. "Yes, I used to love reading about ancient civilizations. Did you know the Library of Alexandria may have held hundreds of thousands of scrolls? Imagine losing all that knowledge." Richard blinked. That wasn't the answer of someone with only scraps of education. That was passion. Later, he asked about science. Without hesitation, Sophie explained the phases of the moon to Emily, drawing them in the dirt with a stick. Emily's eyes widened with wonder. Richard felt a strange mix of pride and worry. Pride because Sophie was clearly brilliant. Worry because he was letting his daughter grow attached to someone whose life was unstable, uncertain. That night, as he tucked Emily into bed, she whispered, "Daddy, can Sophie stay with us? She must be lonely." Richard's heart tightened. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "Sophie has her own life. Things are not so simple." "But she's my friend," Emily whispered sleepily. "And friends should have a home." Richard stood in the doorway long after she had fallen asleep, her words echoing in his mind. For the first time in years, Richard Sterling felt powerless. He had bought companies, outmaneuvered rivals, and shaped the city's skyline. But now, the future of his daughter's happiness seemed to rest in the fragile hands of a girl with no address. And he couldn't decide if letting Sophie stay close was wisdom or dangerous. The next Saturday morning was bright, the air crisp with the smell of spring flowers. Richard had decided that today, he would no longer circle around the truth. He needed answers. Emily was already running ahead toward the oak tree, waving when she spotted Sophie sitting in her usual place. Sophie's notebook rested on her lap, her hair tied back with a worn ribbon. "Daddy, hurry!" Emily called, tugging him forward. Richard followed, but instead of standing back as usual, he lowered himself onto the bench across from Sophie. Her posture stiffened instantly. She glanced from Emily's cheerful face to Richard's serious one, her hand tightening on the notebook. "Relax," Richard said gently. "I only want to talk." Sophie hesitated. "About what?" "About you." Emily, unaware of the tension, pulled out her math book and settled beside Sophie. "Can you help me with this page? Daddy says it's tricky." Sophie gave a small smile, but Richard could see the unease in her eyes. He waited until Emily was busy writing, then leaned forward. "You're not like the other kids I see on the streets," he said quietly. "You're intelligent, articulate. Your notes show advanced learning." "What happened?" For a long moment Sophie was silent. Her gaze drifted to the playground, where children swung and laughed. Finally she spoke. "My mom used to say education was the one thing no one could steal from you," Sophie began. "She worked 2 jobs just to keep me in school. I loved it. Books were my escape. Numbers made sense when life didn't." Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied it. "But when my mom got sick, everything changed. The bills piled up. I tried to keep going, but eventually..." She looked down at her frayed shoes. "School wasn't an option anymore. Paying for medicine was more important." Richard's chest tightened. "And your father?" Sophie shook her head. "Never knew him. It was just me and Mom. After she passed last year, I had nowhere left to go." Emily, who had been listening quietly while pretending to write, looked up. "That's so sad," she whispered, reaching for Sophie's hand. Sophie gave her a small smile, squeezing her little fingers. "It's okay. I'm still here, and I still have my books. That's enough for now." Richard's throat felt dry. He had expected hardship, yes, but not this. Not a girl who had fought so hard to keep learning even while her world collapsed. "You're remarkable," he said softly. Sophie laughed bitterly. "No, I'm just unlucky. Smart doesn't keep you warm at night. Smart doesn't get you a roof." Richard leaned back, troubled. He had spent his life building wealth beyond imagination. Yet here sat a girl who had more determination and resilience than most of the executives he paid fortunes to. Emily tugged Sophie's sleeve. "You should come live with us. We have a big house." "Daddy, tell her she can." Richard froze. Sophie's eyes widened, then quickly lowered. "That's not how life works, Emily," she said gently. "Your daddy's world and mine don't mix." Richard felt a pang of guilt. Sophie was right. Inviting her in was not simple. It was complicated, messy, and full of risks. And yet, as he watched Sophie patiently guide Emily's pencil across the page, he couldn't shake the feeling that this girl, this homeless teenager, was meant to cross their path. For the first time in years, Richard felt the walls of his carefully controlled world begin to crack. The following week was different in the Sterling household. Emily woke up early each morning, humming to herself as she packed her books into her pink backpack. Her enthusiasm was something the maids whispered about in the hallways. "She's never been this excited for lessons before," one of them said. Richard noticed it too. Emily rushed through her breakfast, her eyes shining with a kind of joy he hadn't seen in a long time. "Daddy, are we going to the park today?" she asked eagerly. Richard glanced at his calendar filled with board meetings and business calls. Then he looked at his daughter's hopeful face. With a sigh, he closed his laptop. Yes, sweetheart. We're going. At the park, Sophie was waiting under the oak tree as if she had expected them. Her clothes were still worn, her shoes still broken, but there was a quiet dignity about her. The moment Emily spotted her, she ran forward and threw her arms around Sophie. The girl froze at first, clearly unused to such affection, then slowly patted Emily's back. Careful, Emily, Sophie murmured. I'm not very huggable. Yes, you are, Emily said firmly. You're my best friend. Richard, watching from a few steps away, felt a knot form in his chest. His daughter had all the toys, the clothes, the comforts money could buy, but the one person who made her light up this way was a girl who had nothing. The lesson that day was different. Emily had a storybook with her, one she had been struggling to read. Sophie listened patiently as Emily stumbled through the words. No, not like that, Sophie said gently, pointing to a tricky word. Sound it out. Slowly. You can do it. Emily tried again, her brow furrowed, then broke into a wide grin when she got it right. I did it, she squealed. You did, Sophie said warmly. See? You just needed to trust yourself. Richard cleared his throat. You're very good with her, Sophie. Better than the tutors I've hired. Sophie shrugged. Maybe because I understand what it feels like to struggle. I know what it's like when people expect too much, too fast. Her words struck Richard harder than she realized. He had always pushed Emily to be the best, to excel the way he had. Had he forgotten how heavy expectations could feel for a child? That evening, at dinner, Emily refused to let the subject drop. Daddy, she said between bites of spaghetti, I don't want any more tutors. I only want Sophie. She's the best teacher. Richard set down his fork. Emily, I mean it, she interrupted. I don't care if she doesn't live in a big house. I don't care what anyone says. She understands me. Please don't take her away. Richard looked at his daughter, her little hands clenched in determination. He had rarely seen her so passionate about anything. Later, after Emily went to bed, Richard sat alone in his study. The city lights twinkled outside, but he barely noticed. Charles's warning echoed in his mind. Scandal. Headlines. Investors won't like it. But then he remembered Emily's smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she solved problems with Sophie. For the first time in his life, Richard Sterling was torn between two worlds. The safe, polished world of wealth and reputation, and the uncertain, messy, human world where a homeless girl could change everything. And he knew a decision was coming. One that would alter not only Sophie's life, but his own. Richard Sterling was not a man used to hesitation. In business, he made quick, calculated decisions that shaped entire industries. But with Sophie, every choice felt like stepping into unknown territory. After weeks of watching her with Emily, he could no longer deny what his heart was telling him. Sophie was different. She wasn't just a passing stranger. She had a gift, and she had touched his daughter's life in a way no one else could. So one afternoon, as Emily worked happily on her reading, Richard turned to Sophie. Sophie, he said, his tone calm but serious, I want to help you. Her hand froze on the page she was guiding for Emily. Slowly, she looked up. Help me? Yes, Richard replied. You're clearly intelligent, but you're wasting away out here. You shouldn't have to live like this. Sophie's eyes narrowed. And what do you suggest? That you give me money? A room in your mansion? I'm not a charity case, Mr. Sterling. Richard leaned forward, his voice steady. No, I don't want to give you pity. I want to give you opportunity. A chance to study again. To finish what life stole from you. Sophie stared at him, suspicion clouding her face. Why? Why would a billionaire care about someone like me? Before Richard could answer, Emily piped up, her eyes wide. Because you're amazing, Sophie. Daddy sees it too. Sophie's expression softened, but she quickly looked away. The world doesn't work that way. People don't just help without wanting something in return. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, maybe you're right. Most people don't. But maybe I'm tired of being most people. The next evening, Richard brought up the idea to Charles during a dinner meeting. "You can't be serious," Charles said, nearly choking on his wine. "You want to take in a homeless girl? Do you know what the press will do with that? They'll tear you apart." Richard kept his tone even. "I don't care about the press. I care about my daughter. And she has found more joy in learning with Sophie than she has in years." Charles leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Think, Richard. Investors, clients, they'll question your judgment. They'll say you've gone soft. Do you really want to risk your reputation over a street kid?" Richard's jaw tightened. "This isn't about business. It's about doing what's right." Charles shook his head. "You're walking into a storm." The storm came sooner than expected. The next day, when Richard arrived at the park with Emily, he noticed whispers. Parents pulling their children closer, casting wary glances at Sophie. One woman muttered loudly enough for him to hear, "Disgraceful. A billionaire letting his daughter mix with that." Sophie heard it too. Her face flushed, and she started to gather her things. "I should go," she mumbled. But Emily clung to her arm. "No, don't leave. They don't know you like I do." Richard stepped forward, his voice firm. "Stay, Sophie. Let them talk." Sophie hesitated, her eyes searching his face. For the first time, she saw no doubt there, only quiet strength. And slowly, she sat back down. That evening, Richard called his assistant. "I want you to arrange something," he said. "Find out what it would take for Sophie to return to school. Get her documents, whatever she needs." Quietly, the assistant paused. "Mr. Sterling, may I ask why?" Richard glanced out the window, watching Emily and Sophie laughing in the park below, their heads bent over a book. "Because sometimes," he said softly, "the right investment isn't in buildings or stocks. It's in people." Weeks passed, and slowly, the impossible began to take shape. Sophie's papers were found, thanks to Richard's quiet influence. A scholarship was arranged discreetly, though Richard knew well that the money had come from his own pocket. Still, he wanted her to feel it was her merit, not his charity, that earned her place. The day she held her school acceptance letter in trembling hands, Sophie looked at Richard as though she couldn't believe he was real. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll use it well," Richard replied. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "I will. I promise." Emily jumped up and down beside her. "See, Sophie? I told you Daddy would help. Now you can study and still teach me too." Sophie laughed, the sound freer than Richard had ever heard. "Yes, Emily. Now I can do both." But not everyone was happy. The newspapers had already caught wind of the story. Headlines buzzed. "Billionaire's daughter befriends homeless teen." Some praised Richard for his compassion. Others accused him of weakness, of letting sentiment cloud his judgment. Charles cornered him after a board meeting. "You've changed, Richard. The old you would never have risked his name for a street girl." Richard only smiled faintly. Maybe the old me needed to change. At home, the change was undeniable. Emily was thriving. Her grades improved. Her laughter filled the halls. And for the first time in years, Richard felt like he truly knew his daughter. One evening, as Sophie helped Emily with homework at the dining table, Richard stood in the doorway, watching them. A warmth spread through his chest, something richer than profit, stronger than pride. Sophie noticed his gaze and looked up. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "Thank you. Not for me, but for believing in Emily. She needed that more than anything." Richard's throat tightened. "And I needed you to remind me." Months later, Sophie walked across the stage in a borrowed cap and gown, receiving an award for excellence in her studies. In the audience, Emily cheered so loudly the whole hall turned to look. Richard clapped, his chest swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Sophie caught their eyes in the crowd and smiled. Not the guarded smile of a street girl, but the proud, confident smile of someone who finally belonged. As the three of them left the ceremony together, Emily slipped her hand into Sophie's and then into her father's. "See," Emily said, her eyes sparkling. "I told you Sophie was special." Richard looked down at the two girls, his daughter and the girl who had started as a stranger on a park bench, and nodded. Yes, he said softly, special enough to change everything. And with that, Richard knew this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new one built not on wealth or power, but on kindness, trust, and the lessons only a homeless girl could teach a billionaire. We've come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.